Welcome to PolyCast, a civilization podcast focused on game strategy.
CanusAlbinus,
Makahlua,
TheMeInTeam,
MegaBearsFan.
Hello, one and all. TheMeInTeam, welcome to PolyCast episode 401. Today I am joined by CanusAlbinus.
what is supposed to be happening? I've forgotten.
MegaBearsFan,
I don't really remember either. I don't know what I'm doing.
and possibly a little bit later, Makahlua. We'll have to get our best female voice in for the moment, otherwise, which I don't think we have, so we'll just move on.
I have a female voice I can do, but it doesn't sound like Mackie, so...
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll begin with a little bit of news, which is that, according to Polygon, the what is this place? The Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, which hosts the Video Game Hall of Fame, has recently announced its 2022 class of inductees, which includes The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Miss Pac-Man, Dance Dance Revolution, and Sid Meier's Civilization. I believe they had considered Civilization for a previous induction, but they passed on it for some reason.
Yeah, 32 other titles got in there first.
So I guess it's like the NFL Hall of Fame, where you have a delay before you're allowed to be even on the ballot for it, question mark? Because
I don't know, because...
even the newest of those games seems pretty old to me.
I don't know, because Bejeweled is on there, is already in the list, and what else have we got?
Oh, that's old for sure.
We've got World of Warcraft.
Well, one thing to consider is that I don't know how they did their earlier induction classes, but I know that as of like last year, they were basically doing it by online polls. I think we talked about this previously on this show, and that included a link to where you can recommend games to them. And at that time, I did, in fact, fill out that form for several of my favorite games. One of them was Sid Meier's Civilization. I also nominated Shadow of the Colossus and Silent Hill 2. So
I think Shadow of the Colossus,
like those games, you can thank me.
Shadow of the Colossus is at least noteworthy for its uniqueness. I don't know so much about Silent Hill 2, but I never played that one.
Well, it was considered widely the gold standard of psychological horror and has basically influenced the plots of almost every horror game that has come out since. And it was released back in 2001.
Trying to see if there's anything newer on here.
A little bit influential.
Grand Theft Auto 3 is on here. The Sims, I guess. Street Fighter 2. Tomb Raider, Final Fantasy VII, Mario Kart, Mortal Kombat.
And hey, at least this list includes StarCraft, unlike the list of best strategy PC games that we talked about like 1 or 2 episodes ago.
Yeah.
Although this one does sound like it's more of a popularity thing, which is not surprising if it's an online polling setup.
What the heck is Centipede?
I mean, what else can you do? It's hard to make an objective evaluation for games. There are things you do to identify that a game is bad, like, you know, if the controls don't work, or, you know, it's buggy and it doesn't function properly. But it's a lot harder to say, you know, good features that objectively make a game better than another game.
I think it's just human nature that it's easier to talk about things we dislike than to identify things that we do like. Because usually the things that we do like, we like on a very subconscious level. So it's very hard to explain why we like it. Also, Canis, Centipede was an old arcade game where like a long like trail of centipede things went across the screen, and you had to shoot like each section of it and kill it before it got to the bottom of the screen. It was basically like Space Invaders, except all of these invaders would be like connected to each other in a chain.
I actually played that when it was relatively new, and I was probably still in diapers.
So here's the question.
Doing the Atari as a kid.
Oh, wait, there it is. Space Invaders is on here. Because that's one I would expect to be there.
Interesting. It looks like Miss Pac-Man made it onto the list before Pac-Man.
Nope, Miss
Oh
Pac-Man.
no, Pac-Man's on there too. Okay.
Miss Pac-Man came in this year.
So are these? This list is not alphabetized. So am I then to assume that this is like in the order that they were inducted?
It looks like it.
Well, can't go wrong with Tetris being the first game, that inaugural class. That's
Which is ironic. Considering its source.
Oh yeah, I mean, I personally would consider Tetris to be possibly the best video game ever made. But
I wouldn't go that far, but certainly the most widespread / popular / whatever.
The most accessible and the most understandable, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a real simple, real super addictive puzzle game. Like you can't go wrong with that sort of concept. And Tetris just like absolutely nailed it, hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it the best game because it's completely mindless. So
Yeah, unless you're just going by like raw sales figures or something.
well, if you go by raw sales figures, Tetris wins on almost every level.
Yeah. That also put Minecraft way up there.
Minecraft is on the list, but it's further down.
Yeah.
Sandwiched between Colossal Cave Adventure and King's Quest.
I wonder how many of these were in the inaugural class. I wonder if they started with like 5, 6, 10.
I think it was 8.
Okay, because I'm seeing Pong listed at number 6, and I'm like, I really hope Pong was in the inaugural class.
So they're trying to be at least semi-chronological.
So if it was 8, then it looks like the cutoff line for this list was at The Legend of Zelda being in the second inaugural, or the second induction class.
Oh my goodness, I've got heartburn. Not
Ever
usual.
pleasant.
Not usual.
Is the
for
list
me.
that distasteful for you? My goodness.
No, I think I ate something bad for lunch.
I don't know. I personally don't see anything on this list that I think does not deserve to be in there, either as a really good game or as some important historic artifact. You know, even Bejeweled, I think, has a place in this list.
I don't know if it belongs above Civ, but
Well, I mean, it was kind of the game that kickstarted the entire mobile, genre platform of video games. So, like, in that sense, pretty darned influential. Unfortunately, that genre has since devolved into complete and utter garbage. But back when Bejeweled came out, there was that sliver of hope that mobile gaming might actually be decent.
mobile gaming
I feel like
can
there
be...
probably are some good games. I just don't have occasion to mess with it myself, really. But
Yeah.
there's a sea of garbage, but there are some things that float too.
Well, it is kind of
Yeah.
like Steam in that respect. There's a lot of
That's
crap,
true.
but
Oh my gosh, yeah!
there's
If you just
still
look
good
at the
stuff.
Steam library, like if you just pick random games from a Steam library, like truly random, like you just like roll an RNG and have it pick anything in the library, you're not that likely to get something good.
It will probably be an anime graphic novel.
I was going to
Yeah.
say an asset flip.
Or that, yeah.
That too, yeah.
Oh, there's something in here that mentioned what some of these games were that we didn't recognize. Let me see if I can find it. Keep talking.
Well, since I just got here, which ones did you not recognize?
Colossal Cave Adventure.
Yeah, I didn't recognize that.
Yeah,
either.
that one does
that's-
not ring a bell for me either.
Okay, that's from the late 70s. It's a text adventure. It's like Zork before Zork existed. And it was on
Oh.
like mainframes and things like that. And it was that and Space War, Space War goes back to the 60s because they used to play it on those really big room-sized computers with a tiny, little monochrome screen.
Sort of like Sid Meier's Star Trek.
Sid Meier's Star Trek, what?
It was one of the first games he made when he was at university in the 70s and 60s.
Well,
Oh,
shoot, where's that?
I
I
bet
want to
you-
play that.
I bet you anything it's a Space War clone. Because that's like, Space War is like 1961 or 1962, and it was at, I forget what university it was at that they
Oh,
did
shoot.
that. It might have been MIT or something like that.
Was that like a vector graphics like shooter
Yeah.
game?
I don't remember what it was exactly. I just know that he mentioned it as like one of the chapters in his memoir.
Yeah, I mean,
I
Space
still
War,
have to get and read that memoir. I still haven't gotten it.
It is a pretty
Yeah.
good read. But if
Space
you
War
type
was
in,
just about literally the first computer video game, not counting computer versions of tic-tac-toe and chess and stuff like that. And Colossal Cave Adventure was, I don't know if there was something else before that, but it was pretty much was the first text-based adventure type thing. I mean, you guys would know Zork better, but yeah. What else was not recognizable?
I think that was about it.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them I've at least heard of. A lot of them I've played in some capacity, although generally not too much.
I mean, there's plenty of these games on here that I've never played, and some of which that I actually dislike. So,
Also, King's Quest is in here, but not Ultima. What?
Yeah.
I mean, they're two different types of RPG. But
I was going to say.
Yeah, but Ultima is what inspired things like Final Fantasy. So, hello.
Yeah.
Well, if you did miss it, Mackie, since you joined a little late, there is a link in this Polygon article to nominate games for next year's class.
Oh.
So if you think Ultima should be on that list, go ahead and...
I'm going there right now.
I can't find it. I'm so mad at myself.
All right, time to start nominating random games from the Steam library.
Okay, the Star Trek game. An ASCII game made while at General Instrument that never left the local network. It was the second game.
Okay, probably does not hold up well in the intervening, 30 or 40 years.
I don't think it exists anywhere.
Yeah, probably not. Unless Sid has it on, an old, floppy disk somewhere.
An old 8-inch floppy disk. Or maybe even a paper tape if it was long enough ago.
It was in 1979?
It could be a paper tape. I mean, it could be a floppy disk, but it'd also be a paper tape at that point.
I thought that they had magnetic tape by that point.
They had that too, but it just depended on the system you were working with at the university, because if it was a few years older, it might be the paper tape system, not the magnetic tape one.
He wasn't at university anymore. He was at General Instrument. And apparently he caused productivity to go down significantly for a while until they banned it.
Oh, damn, Portal's not on this list. I'm going to have to nominate Portal.
Well, the last time we talked about this museum and they didn't put Civ on the list, we kind of assumed and decided that this was a kind of a sham list anyway, because it's probably made by boomers.
Well, if you're leaving anything up to the open internet voting, you're going to get some weirdness along with a lot of predictable answers.
Well, my understanding of how it works is there's a form to nominate games, and there's probably a group of curators who go through all of the nominees that are submitted, and they probably select from those. I doubt it's just a pure popularity contest with, votes of the public or whatever.
Yeah. Can't really have gaming McGame face.
Yeah, and a lot of things that are in here are legitimately, this is either the first of its genre or started something revolutionary. I mean, I don't remember what this list looked like last time, but this does have a lot of... I'm looking through this list and I'm like, yeah, actually, most of these things. Solitaire is kind of weird, I'll give you that.
Yeah, especially as a computerized version of a card game that already exists. If we're going to put those in, then yeah, chess and checkers, computerized versions should be on here too. Yeah, poker.
The Royal Game of Ur.
Honestly, looking at this list, I feel like the only game that even comes close to maybe not deserving being on this list is Tomb Raider, because I personally don't think Tomb Raider was all that great or super influential. But that's just me. I don't
know. It was pretty popular and made a movie or so.
Made a movie. You did not do this kind of 3D exploration before that. A lot of things like Uncharted and things that have come afterwards are influenced by that. It's its own little 3D exploration. I can't really call it archaeology, but
it's got puzzles in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
there's a little overlap there with Zelda, but there's a lot of things different about it too. Or at least enough.
Female protagonist.
I didn't say it doesn't deserve to be on the list. I just said it's the closest thing on this list to me personally thinking is a stretch.
I think Animal Crossing is a stretch.
I'll give you that.
You act like Zelda hasn't been a protagonist, Canus. You're being silly.
Not on any of the games in this list.
Are you telling me that the CDI games are not valid candidates for this list?
They're not on this list.
I would also rather see...
If you haven't seen them, I will say I'm not being serious, and then you should look them up because it's hilarious.
I personally would also see entries from other franchises, other intellectual properties be represented before sequels start getting in. So in that sense, I'm kind of iffy on Ocarina of Time and Miss Pac-Man, considering that Pac-Man and Legend of Zelda are already on the list. But again, that's whatever.
It is different gameplay, though. Then the original NES Zelda versus Ocarina of Time are different by enough.
And there's enough new things in the gameplay that it made it... a lot of games have copied the gameplay from Ocarina of Time.
I would outright say it tests different skills to a large degree. Because, I mean, you kind of needed a guide to know where to go in the second quest of the NES Zelda. It was kind of obnoxious in that way. But really, most of the challenge wasn't figuring out the puzzles. It was more so dealing with the difficulty of the rooms. And, I don't know. I've played a lot of Zelda games, some of them completed, but most of them are not that difficult in the 3D era in terms of combat. That's really not what they were going for with it.
Anyway, this article also does mention one of the reasons that the museum curator cited for including Civilization, which is that it is one of the rare games that highlights creation over destruction, which is something that is still not common in video games today, and was even less common back in 1991.
Don't be silly. Take all the cities.
In today's forum talk, we have a thread by Steve G700, which I assume is a prototype GTA graphics card. He asks a question because it seems like he's in the industrial era or maybe the modern era, and he just got a great scientist, and in the same turn, 5 other AIs got great scientists, and one of them got 2 great scientists. And he wants to know how this happens. And I believe the conclusion or the explanation for this is that the first great scientist of a new era is more expensive, like 30 points more expensive or something, or maybe 45. And all the other AIs, if they were above the regular cost, when you took the expensive one, then they could all pick one too.
Interesting to see Turing and Schrödinger in 1600s law.
And Nobel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess in the earlier versions of Civ, they didn't arrogate scientists at all, so you could get whatever at any time. So
Archimedes has been born in 2015.
Yeah, why not?
Well, I guess that was a quick topic.
Well, the second post there is explaining that if they already had something like if they got discounted somehow because it was from a previous era, and then the AI already had 60% plus of the cost or something, it would almost be like an instant buy. There's a whole formula down here, a couple, I think.
There's also the fact that civs can pass on taking a particular great person, and when they do that, I don't think they're allowed to take a great person of that type until the great person that they passed on was taken. So if you have one civ that has a crap ton of campuses and is generating lots of great scientist points, and they pass on a particular great scientist, they have to wait for one of the other civs to take that great scientist. And in the meantime, if they're generating double the great person points of all those other civs, they're going to save up enough to buy more than one when that scientist is finally taken by someone else. So that's probably why one civilization in here has 2 of them. They had probably passed on a previous one.
Hard to say. All right, next topic.
Speaking of things being random, or random things, we're on Ciphonetics. How do you say your name?
Now, Coden?
I'll go with what Candace said. This topic started with Civ 6 over randomization. They're like, first, this isn't an advice for it. I don't want advice for how to play, but let's dig into it. Why does he get so angry every time he plays it?
You guys, let's give him advice on how to play.
Yeah. He thinks it's over randomized. It's not that he doesn't want the randomization. It's been something in Civ games because you want every game to be a little bit different. That's why it has so much replayability. But he thinks it's unbalanced. Sometimes you have barbarian, like an example he gives us, sometimes you have barbarians in every direction possible, sending scouts to you, and you can't do anything with your one warrior and a scout, and you get dead. And other times it puts it in the weirdest spawning locations, which, yeah, I've seen those. And sometimes you have, on maps, you'll have a huge mountain range that divides you in a way that it's next to impossible to go after the AI or anybody else. I mean, it's great for defending yourself, but...
Some of the issues that this person brings up, to me, I think are not necessarily issues of randomization, but are actually problems created by playing on the higher difficulty levels. Because if you're playing on Deity, one of the reasons that you might be surrounded by barbarians is that all of the other AI civilizations like start the game with multiple settlers and multiple units. So they reveal a lot more of the fog of war around them, which restricts where new barbarian camps can spawn and makes it more likely that they spawn near you because you only have the one city and the one unit and reveal very little of the fog of war in your area. So that's I don't know if that's really a random problem with randomness or if that's just one of the many frustrating issues with the way that the game front loads difficulty in the higher difficulty levels.
I forget, is that really a thing in Civ 6 where they have a fixed number of camps they're trying to place?
I don't know if they have a fixed number of camps, but they still have to spawn in the fog of war, which means that if all the other civs... It's not necessarily that they have to be near you, but that they're just more likely to be near you, unless the game has some logic that says, a certain number of camps can't spawn within a certain range of a specific player or of each other. But I definitely don't think that's the case, because otherwise we wouldn't be seeing this problem at all.
Yeah. I mean, I partially agree / disagree with this post, and it's not easy to parse. Like, I've long criticized that you could get scouted by barbarians before you could possibly construct a second unit.
Yeah, on turn 4.
Yeah, and thus have your city under fire from that and slowing down your early game through really no counterplay. There was no choice you could have made other than to guess the direction that scout might have come from that could have altered the outcome there. You just have to deal with being behind that game.
And even then, your only defense is your one starting warrior, which might not even be able to catch up and kill that scout before it finds you. So, and gets back to its outpost, because the scout has 3 movement and your warrior has 2.
Now you can probably survive, but that that just sucks. Like, you just take a huge penalty for no reason. And the extremes of the spawn logic are pretty rough. They're pretty bad. But that's been true in Civ, at least since Civ 4, and I would argue since before that even. Like, you could get some extremely unfair outcomes in any of the games. I don't know that Civ 6 is necessarily worse than its previous 2 predecessors in that regard. So, like, what do you do with that? You can probably constrain the starting algorithm more to guarantee that nobody gets hosed. But if you do that, then you're going to get a lot more of the same types of positions in addition. So it's like, how far do you want to go with balance? Because you can also make it so that, like, the Civ uniques are less powerful relative to generic options, and therefore all the civs are more balanced. You can do this with start positions, but then it's not as interesting or variable game to so I think if you want to go with a competitive setting, you probably should constrain the starts, or like you really have like kind of a fixed start position where you're guaranteed certain resources, etc. But for normal gameplay, I'm not convinced that you want to constrain randomness too much in that way. But I do think that there's some balancing issues too. Like, the early Barb Scouts were an example of that.
And that would be easily alleviated by just a simple rule change, such that the barbarian outposts do not start the game with a scout, and they have to spawn the scout the way that they spawn other units. That at least gives the players and civs like a buffer of 10 or 20 turns or something like that before those scouts even show up, which is at least enough time to pop out a second warrior or a slinger or a scout or 2 of your own.
Now, as for the DD AIs rushing you, that is a survivable encounter, although it is not pleasant. But you're kind of like going to use your city to sponge hits a little bit, but not too much because you'll get it conquered. And then you have your warrior, or probably warriors, like you could probably get a second one out, fortified on defensive terrain near the city. They not only prevent the city from getting surrounded or getting hit too much, but they also are soaking in some damage themselves. And if you do that, you can survive DD rushes. I've done it a few times. It's a bit of a pain. You never want to see it, for the same reason you don't want a bunch of barbs in your throat, like, a couple turns into the game. It's going to slow you down.
He's also talking later on about how he said major over randomization of the resources and map. Like, last game he tried his capitals okay, but he couldn't find a good spot for the second city. And he's like, It's like, one, you could turn on abundant resources, which would help with you having more nice city spots. But that's also just part of the game. Not every city is
the way to play.
Yeah, sometimes I kind of wish that the game would let me like load the game and look at the map before I do things like choose difficulty level. Like, this is a crappy Tundra start map. I kind of want to bump myself back down to King difficulty for this one.
a lot of the time, if your start's bad and you think your neighbor's is good, well, take your neighbor's start. In the literal sense, go conquer them. Like, because in order to leverage the quality of the tiles is a different path than to go for military. And the AI is not a good fighter, so you can generally just conquer it. Again, it would be completely unfair in multiplayer, but we're not. The vast majority of games are not competitive multiplayer, so you're going to be playing around RNG somewhat. Now, that being said, like the complete extreme outliers, I feel for this poster because it is true. Like, I have an old screenshot where my starting city, where I'm not Russia, like I have one resource and everything else is tundra in my starting, and there's not even that many forests. And that's significantly slower of an opening than otherwise. No matter what you do, it happens.
And that's why there's a big button in the UI to regenerate the map.
Yeah, but we don't play that way.
Yeah, and he was also talking about his second city not having a good spot to put it. It's like, well, sometimes the map just rolls that way. It's not. I mean,
plus you can usually get some value out of even like marginal locations.
Something else that would help a little bit with stuff like the ridiculous tundra starts would be if the game map were not on like a cylinder and were maybe wider at the poles and a little narrower, wider at the equator and a little narrower at the poles, so that like ice and tundra are not so dramatically overrepresented in the volume of the map.
Yeah, or at least have the settings where if you enter the settings, you could make the tundra belt pretty small.
Although that, of course, poses lots of additional, design challenges of how to, make the wrapping and stuff work.
Oh, you could literally just do what you're doing now, but have less tundra. And that should be something that could be handled via the pre-game map generation settings.
Hopefully someday we'll get computers like powerful enough and design good enough that the maps for Civilization games can be mapped onto something resembling a ball. But I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, there you go. 3D Civ. You play in a first-person perspective in a Civ game. You have to move around, lol.
Well, there are strategy and tile placement games that do take place on ball-like maps.
Yeah, you can do it.
None of them that I've ever seen are like anywhere close to being on the scale or scope of Civilization.
It's true. And you might be right. That might be scaled up just with brute force computing power eventually.
And despite the fact that this is not advice, but people have actually given him good advice things. Like people were always telling him, it's like you have two things. You can set this up to fit your personal needs. If you want it to be a little bit nicer and a little more fair, you can set it up like that. You could step down a difficulty level, do things like the abundant resources, hell, even turn off the barbs. Or if you want it to be unfair to you and kick your butt, well, keep what you're doing. You can make it more custom you can sort of, in a sense, customize your difficulty level.
Yeah. And customize the randomness to some degree. And there's always going to be a mix of the game's, like the game's randomness messing with you and one's own skill interacting with it. And it's difficult to, especially as the person in question, separate out what things causing problems are the player's choices versus the game. And there's usually a little of both. In most games, it's more the player than the game, but that's not always the case. And there are some outlier scenarios where it's almost completely the game. So just how it is. Are we done with this?
I think so.
Well, then we will move on to another aspect of the game. This one started by Victoria. Do you want an AI that can make reasoned choices? And this third is interesting. I jumped into it midway through. But somewhat of a thing we should start with probably is defining our terms for what you mean by reasoned choices. Because it seems like some people are thinking like the AI will think like a human or react, make long-term plans like that. And I don't think we need general AI to make a challenging AI in the context of a Civ game. Or rather, I know we don't need general AI to make a challenging Civ AI. But then, yes, it won't think like a human. The real question is, how effectively do you want it to play that? So, first of all, do we want an AI that can make reasoned choices? Yes, but not in Civ. And we want to make sure we have our ducks in a row before doing that, because it's dangerous as hell. But not really related to Civ. And if you want to make an effective AI in a Civ game, that's a lot easier than that. And I would like to see that. But I think I'm somewhat in the minority. And I know we've covered the topic previously on this podcast as well, in terms of how well the AI should play in the context of the game rules. And I am much more of a hardliner in that if something the AI does to win is degenerate, that is an indictment of the game's design rather than the AI, if the AI is a good player. But yeah, I would like to see a stronger AI that is then less reliant on bonuses, and the difficulty comes from the AI's decision making, and then maybe even heap the player with bonuses, or just make the higher difficulties use a more advanced machine learning agent or something, for example. But like that's not cheap. I know it's not practical, but if it's something that I want to see, then yes, of course.
Yeah, and part of it is we're bound by the hardware, because there's a vast range of hardware that everybody's game is going to run on, and so they have to create something that is still going to be runnable on the minimum one and yet provide challenge to the people who have a maximum set of hardware. But even then, a properly rational thinking, and I'm air quoting that massively, AI is going to require a hell of a lot more computing power than what we have on a desktop machine.
I don't think that's true.
You can get little things.
If you involve machine learning, which they've done in numerous games now, you need the extremely powerful computer to train the agent in the first place. But I don't think you need it to just play against that AI.
Especially if the game gets those decisions off of the cloud.
Well, I wouldn't put it.
That's an option too, but I think you could just have the AI trained.
I wouldn't use the cloud. What I would suggest would be you use some sort of a network to train the AI how to play the game, and then you just release that AI code as the playing game, and then that's how it works. And you could do that every time you create a major change in the game. You just rerun the learning code, and that might take a while, but
yeah, the actual creation of it would not be trivial in terms of computing power, but I think running it once it exists is not that much of a barrier.
Oh, yeah.
And like we're seeing people do this in different games already. I mean, I mentioned the StarCraft example, but now there's Rocket League bots that are playing at Grand Champion level too. Like, there's probably only, sub 1% of people out there who can still beat that. So I do think it's within reach of current technology, but that isn't reasoning in the sense that it's being defined in the thread, right? It's basically a trained algorithm for decision making specific to that game that is so effective in the context of that game that it outperforms humans. That's not the same thing as reasoning, but it will beat humans who try to use reasoning to overcome it in nearly every case.
Yeah, it's not passing the Turing test anytime soon.
No, but like even something like Civ, it's complicated, yes. But if you're doing billions to trillions of training games or whatever, however many, like sooner or later, there's a finite number of choices and a lot that can be trivially ruled out in terms of where you can move your units, what things you can build every turn. Like it wouldn't take long to identify things that are obviously bad choices. And once you have the choices constrained, there really aren't that many possible choices per turn. So I see no reason that an AI agent in this game couldn't do things that we have already seen in numerous other games, like, beat the very best Go player in the world, the very best chess player in the world, the very best StarCraft 2 player in the world. So yeah, I think the AI certainly, if it were trained on Civ 6, could do the same thing.
But do we really want that in the base game?
Well, you could either adjust the bonuses, or you can do what, apparently it's possible to use earlier versions of agents that play at various levels of capability. And I think that would be the true ideal. You can make an AI, you can make different AIs for each difficulty that play at different levels of ability that are comparable to measured levels of the players. That's an even higher bar. Like this is if cost us no object or whatever. Like I don't expect to see this from games. I don't. But
I wonder if it's also
possible in principle.
I wonder if it's also possible to re-weight the decisions that the computer makes so that it gives preferential treatment to less optimal decisions as a way of scaling difficulty levels in a video game.
That is a terrible idea because the AI already makes terrible decisions. We don't need to give it the ability to do more.
Well, no, I mean, if you had
look at machine learning code and identify something like that and tweak it so easily. I don't think so. I might be mistaken. The other difficulty with that, though, is that it would then require the developers themselves to be somewhat aware of decisions made at varying levels of gameplay.
Well,
and a lot of devs can't even handle high-level gameplay.
Well, what I'm imagining is more like a piece of code that basically says, if you're looking at several decisions and they all have, different outcomes, different levels of outcomes, ignore the ones that result in the best outcomes and pick the one, and depending on the difficulty level, either pick the ones that have mediocre outcomes or pick the ones that outright have bad outcomes for like the easiest difficulty settings. Like that doesn't seem like it would be something where they would have to be a whole lot of like individual scenario scripting for, and could possibly be fairly dynamic.
Oh yeah, you're probably right, because now I'm thinking like chess engines. They have their top move recommendations, but they also have a list of alternative moves that are ordered based on the AI's evaluation of the strength.
Yeah, they're all weighted. So you just tell the AI, okay, disregard the ones that are above a certain threshold or the top X, outcomes, and then pick one from the remaining list.
It's hilarious.
And then you could have hypothetically, you could have an AI that at the highest difficulty levels plays, quote, perfectly, but then also scales down based on the difficulty level that's chosen without the developers having to actually go in and program any certain scenarios or explicitly program different behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be difficult but possible in principle, would be my guess. But now we'd really want to hear from developers on it, because I don't have the expertise to evaluate how challenging this would be. Because I'm picturing scenarios where like you have only moves versus scenarios where like your top 10 moves are all pretty good. And I don't think it would be easy to generalize. Like your third best move in some cases might be nearly as good as your first move, your top move. Whereas in other cases it might be like game losing if you're just like throwing units away in an early war, for example.
Oh,
like
then the
player's rushing you, and it's like, okay, you either suicide this unit or you put it in the spot where you live.
Yeah, I'm not an AI programmer, so I have no idea how difficult that something like that would be.
I'm just thinking in game context, like you could not pick like always do the top best or always disregard top 3 or always X anything. Like there's even from a game play perspective, I just know that it would not work if you told the AI to always disregard the 5 best options to it. You'd have to have that be dynamic somehow, and I don't think that would be an easy problem to solve. But maybe, I don't want to say it's impossible, but
the game could put weights on the decisions based on how good it thinks the outcome would be, and then have cutoffs for what those weights would be. That's kind of how I'm thinking. But again, I'm not an AI programmer. I don't know how these things work. I could be completely off base.
But even then, like there are situations in chess where it's like mate in 1 or like -3 for black. Like either you can win the game outright, or if you don't do this move, you are in a losing position. And I could envision some scenarios in Civ that are similar to that, where if you cut off the top weighted stuff, it's suddenly into bad move territory already. And like it's a big ask to get the nuance right for this in the game with as many decisions as Civ. I think that's significantly harder than making an AI that plays it well.
And I think the devs have said before, when they've done the AIs that play better than our current ones, is that you get the player frustration because the AI is too good at it.
Yeah, but that's where I disagree with the devs, because a lot of that comes down to the AI is playing the game as it's designed more optimally, and the game itself, the design itself, independent of the AI, the mechanical incentives of the game do not align with the developer's design vision or how they expect people to play. And when you have that kind of incongruence, you're going to get unfun outcomes, period. And it's the same thing. Like you can have people who are playing optimally against each other, and that's also frustrating because the game isn't really designed for that.
I would also imagine that a lot of the people who would complain about that are probably also the types of players who are playing the game more in like a role play kind of sense than in a like pure strategy gaming kind of sense, where they're not necessarily themselves attempting to play optimally. They're just kind of, having fun role playing as Caesar or whatever. And then the AIs are not role-playing their characters, and that might be where some of that frustration comes from.
Yeah, they're wondering, I'm role-playing, why are you not mad at me because I've conquered you or conquered your neighbors so much, or something.
Right, or the situation
non-trivial, maybe even the dominant percentage of the player base. I mean, certainly, almost nobody plays optimally, but a lot of people don't even try to improve in the context of, making mechanically more sound decisions game to game. They really are just playing to roleplay, but then they get upset when they lose against the AI. And to my mind, that is an incongruence at the player level. Like that person has incoherent preferences. But the fact of the matter is that's a significant percentage of your paying customers. So I guess if you want the game to perform well in the sales department, you're going to have to at least somewhat cater to what are functionally incoherent preferences. And I wouldn't want to be put in that place as a dev, but I get that looks like the reality of the situation to me.
Yeah, if they came through before a Civ game and asked all the players what they want, there'd be this super, super, super long list, and you'd have feature creep at the wazoo. Because I think that's
mutually
happened with
exclusive things. There will be plenty of things on that list where if you implement one, you cannot do the other for somebody else.
Yes. And I've seen that with a couple of games that were Kickstarter games, that the things the players asked to have put in, and they're like, oh, sure, we'll put that in. But it was way too much work for the small team they had.
Yeah, especially when the benefits of the Kickstarter is if you pay a certain amount, we will put what you want in the game, and then it just becomes like it's not pay to win, but I don't know exactly what you would call it, but yeah, the people who have more money to throw at your project are not necessarily the people who understand what the product should be the best.
Yes.
Although if I'm a developer, I would still want that list. I would not make any commitments to picking anything on it. But like when you crowdsource ideas like that, you can get some great suggestions or great ideas from lists like that.
Yeah,
and some of them will make sense in the context of the game otherwise. And there's no way one person can possibly think of every potential cool thing that would fit their game to the same degree that like millions of people could. And so but you would still need the designer of the game to be a good designer of the game and to make that evaluation. So like I wouldn't want to make them beholden to those suggestions, but just having more ideas available to choose from and implement would certainly be beneficial.
Yeah, and for every person who can donate, $1,000 to your Kickstarter and get the top level tier rewards, there's 100 or more other players who might have really good ideas for how the game should work, but can't afford to contribute anything or, minimal amounts. And,
it's not 1K. That's not a typical. Yeah,
hopefully they're not being completely ignored because they're not ponying up the dough.
Is this a be careful what you wish for kind of thing?
I think so.
I mean, we'll see. It is already here that people are making AIs that players can't beat. So it's just going to be a matter of how that gets integrated into game design as time goes on.
Okay, well, I guess we are ready to move on to the next topic then, which is a Reddit thread started by Gusty Scorf 7 days ago, asking what is a weird or extremely unlikely Civ that you unironically want in a Civ game?
Tibet and Ukraine.
Yeah.
Hey, he's got Moogles there. I don't think that would be weird, but it seems unlikely.
I just noticed you listed either Texas or California. Dude, no, don't get them started.
That's hilarious.
No, don't open that can of worms, please.
Well, Texas is at least a historical country.
Yeah.
For all of 10 years, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, it could technically fit the mold in that. Yeah, that's exactly fits the third title though. Like that is a weird choice. It is extremely unlikely, and it would be hilarious.
Also,
so yes,
for you Texas nationalists out there, I do want to point out that the entire time Texas was independent, they were almost broke, on the verge of bankruptcy, and continually and repeatedly attempting to join the United States. So,
yeah.
Well, I would say their geopolitical situation might have had an influence on that. Plus, they just didn't have that many people.
Yeah, that doesn't help. No, don't get me wrong, I love Texas, but that part of your culture needs to be reminded of its roots.
But yeah, I think that would be hilarious, Civ. And there's no way a mainline Civ would add it. Now, the Manchurian conquest of China, or really any different dynasty that was around for long periods of time in China, would be valid. Similar to something like Mughals, it is something of a oversimplification to just lump all of this into this China across its entire history.
Which China is it? Manchu China, King China, Mughal China? I mean, there's very many variations of China.
Mughal China?
Mughal China?
Sure.
It's one of
why not?
I've been playing too much of EU4.
Somebody's watched too much of you for people
I'm just
playing it.
thinking, what else do we have in the types of Chinas? We have Wan China, Han China. There's so many of them over 5,000 years. We can't just always use freaking Wu Saitan or Wang Shi Huang or whatever the pronunciation
Apparently
of
we
that
can.
is.
But I would prefer to see some variety. But we could also just legitimately include different options as a Civ with different eras focused on based on what was available in the country at the time.
Yeah.
And China isn't the only country that sort of thing applies to. I mean, there's also, empires like Egypt, which, ancient Egypt existed for thousands of years under multiple dynasties. They probably had a more consistent culture than
Their
China.
culture didn't really change that much.
Yeah, invaded and conquered, but they did worship different gods over that time. There was different architecture, so you could have a case for different dynasties of Egypt being different civilizations as well, just like different dynasties of China.
Yeah, like the Mughals being integrated into the general India Civ is even more egregious because they were foreign conquerors that got a huge percentage of India and held on to it for a long period of time with a completely different religion, culture, etc.
Didn't Civ 4 have a Mughal leader for India?
No.
Civ 5 had the Mughal fort.
Yeah, Civ 5 had the Mughal fort as part of the Indian civilization, which is weird.
Which is it's one of those hold up moments.
Because
that's like putting a Native American building in the U.S. Uniques or something.
Yes,
it's awkward.
Go.
Let's see. Civs I would like to see in Civ. Obviously Tibet and Ukraine, but those should be added at the expense of Russia. Like, we should remove Russia, honestly.
Well, I don't think Russia would care about Tibet, to be fair. That's not a Russia sticking point.
Not really, I guess. Maybe the Ainu?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, we're going for an extremely unlikely, so sure. I do like Paraguay just because their history of that war. That was absurd. Such an absurd war to even start.
Somebody in here suggested the pirate things. Excuse me. Pirate republics, that was the word.
Libertalia?
Yeah. Sure, the whole thing is piracy. Why not?
As far as I know, we have not proven that Libertalia actually existed. But the one in the Caribbean certainly did.
It would, at least as a scenario, that would be very interesting.
I'm just thinking how cancerous they are in EU4, and it would be hilarious to have them and be similarly cancerous in a Civ game.
I'd like to see Israel, but that's just because I'm Christian and I like Israel, but has a big importance to our culture. But the Pueblo would be nice, but I don't think we're going to get them.
We should include the African country of Chad just for the meme.
That would be pretty hilarious, but who would you make it the leader?
All depends
Chad,
just how much of a meme do you want to make this? Question mark.
Do you want to make this a meme? Yes.
As soon as the leader screen pops up, it looks very different to other leaders somehow.
Somebody suggested that Inuit for something else. Do we have a bonus for snow or tundra? To have another Civ that would utilize the snow and ice tundra area more, because we don't really have, except for Russia getting a little bit of a bonus. That's about it. Or Canada as well. Yeah.
To be honest,
there really discussing earlier how much the map is tundra.
There really should be civilizations that get bonuses to like parts of the world that other people don't want to live in, and they should be substantial enough that they can compete with the rest of the world. But
and especially since, as I pointed out earlier, the game map is on a cylinder, which instead of a spheroid, which dramatically overrepresents how much ice and tundra is on the.
I wonder if there's a way to fix that. Probably, but it would be very difficult. It would change the game. I think
one way to do it.
You can make a spherical map with hexes, but if you're looking at the map from above, you're going to see the curvature, and that would be very different in a Civ game.
Yeah, the other way would be to have a map where there are just more tiles at the equator than there are at the poles, but then you would have to have some specific logic for how the wrapping works, like what tiles wrap to other tiles, and that's something that might be very difficult to communicate to the player, and also probably to draw when the player is looking at the edges of the map.
I could see you could do it like a chart, where you draw an arrow that's kind of arcing between the two, because I assume in the polar part of the map, you would have area where tiles would normally be, but because the thing is a sphere, there's just not anything there. Sort of like how that one map projection where they cut all the continents out and leave the rest white. And if you do it that way, you could, on the background for the map, you could just draw arrows between the ones that connect. You'd have to be careful, though, because you could very easily get into a over-busy environment. But that's not the topic. We should talk about civs. Does anybody else have any they'd like? I kind of want Malaysia.
I'm just reading through some of these. Some of these are pretty far out there.
I do think we should have something in. Well, I guess if you put something in Persia that's Islamic, that would be Timurids.
Yeah.
Which becomes Mughals, so you just call them Mughals. Pre-Islamic Indonesia?
I would say those are pretty distinct from each other, actually. Like, Mughals and Timurids are a little bit separated from each other, and quite separated in terms of territory and legacy.
I guess my EU4 is showing.
I've long advocated for seeing more, nomadic civilizations or pastoral civilizations that also have, nomadic or pastoral gameplay styles associated with them. And one of my go-to examples for that would be, Great Plains Native Americans.
There should definitely be more Native American civs in the game, because maybe I'm biased because I live in America, but they have a really interesting culture.
And it would be interesting because if we had more nomadic civs, then you could have a structure for those civs to actually stay nomadic. If there was more than one civ that had it, it would justify, I guess, the development cost of trying to have a slightly different.
Oh, you could have tons of them, too, if you wanted to go that route. Because you also had native cultures in South America, although not all of those were nomadic. Pretty much any of the Mongol offshoots, and there were a ton after the Mongol Empire collapsed. Yeah, certainly the Huns. They could be changed into that.
I'm sure there were probably
most of the Central Asian nations were, in different points in history, you had huge chunks of that land that were nomadic and quite threatening to their neighbors.
Most of the time between 1000 or 100 AD to 1500 AD, it was almost all nomadic land.
Well, sort of. Already by the 1400s, a lot of those were. I don't think they were really any longer comparable in terms of their economy or setup.
Yeah, they had mostly evolved into medieval states, but that's the very end of my time list.
Well, yeah, because the Mongols were they're 1200s in the first place. So.
Ooh, Andalusia.
Oh yeah, someone actually had that in here.
Somebody from Australia that isn't Australia.
What?
One of the Aboriginal tribes, maybe.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's what they're getting at in saying that.
Somebody from Siberia, maybe? Just to cheese off Russia?
I've seen Texas a few more times.
Yeah.
Well,
Perm, just to screw up Russia?
I mean, I don't see any issue with adding Ireland. That's unironically fine.
Ireland?
Yeah.
We already have Ireland, kind of.
Well, that's something they were talking about in there, is that the different Celtic civilizations have all been lumped into one mostly, or you got the Gauls, but Ireland is different from Wales, which is different from Scotland. I mean, we have Scotland now, but we haven't had Wales, and we haven't had Ireland on. We had Boudica as the Celts, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think, that's not Ireland, though. Dirt. Yeah. She was in England, Steph.
It's basically the same.
Oh, don't tell them that. Don't tell them that.
I just love that phrase when used in the context of two countries, because it is frequently an effective troll.
Well, the Russians thought they were the same and made a picture about it, but...
I mean, yeah, probably from a Roman perspective, chunks of England and Ireland are the same thing, so, I mean, yeah, depending.
I don't think the Romans ever made it to Ireland.
I'm sure they knew of it, though.
They probably knew of it.
Regarded the people there about the same as the people they were conquering in England, as in they didn't give a crap because they weren't Roman.
They knew it was over there, but it was going to be too much of a pain in the butt, and they'd heard tales from the well, they're not British, but who are there going, don't go over there, they're a pain to fight. Rome's like, this big island's enough.
I believe they were called the Britons, BRT, or Briton.
Rhodesia, Ghana.
Oh yeah, and Rome was already having problems with the Scots, so...
Yeah. It just wouldn't make sense to make that front even more of a hassle than it already was. And it's already difficult for a nation of that era to administrate something at that distance over water. Like, that's absurd.
I want less European civs and more African civs.
Yeah, we've had that as a topic before about Civ being a bit Eurocentric.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main
Civilization,
reason we
plenty
don't see more African civs is it's just hard to design for them. We don't know as much.
Yeah, whereas when you get into Southeast Asia and stuff, you have a lot of information about other civs that have been there. It's like we don't see as many from South America or Central America as well, because a lot of that information got destroyed by the Europeans who colonized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's true for both Africa and South America and Central America.
We still have a lot of information about a lot of places that seem like they should have been lost, but we have definitely lost more than we should have.
Yeah, well, in the case of like things like the Aztecs and the Maya and groups like that, like they have the benefit of having recorded a lot of things literally in stone, whereas a lot of the cultures in Africa maybe not so much.
I'm not sure.
Oral history or something like that, and the people who knew it
most
died.
of Africa is mostly oral history. I don't think they had like written records the same way that we did in Europe, but.
Yeah, so when, the colonists come and they either destroy those cultures or, assimilate them, those stories are just lost. Whereas, like I said, with the Aztecs and the Maya, like at least we still have all the architecture and all the, writing on stone tablets and stuff like that, that as long as someone knows how to translate it, we have a window back into those histories.
Oh, we did figure out
how people mean sub-Saharan Africa, but they just generalize it to Africa as if like Egypt and pretty much everything in northern Africa and Ethiopia, etc., just aren't part of the consideration when it comes to discussing sub-Saharan Africa.
Well, a big part of that is because a lot of those cultures, people associate them more with Europe and the Middle East because they are more involved.
Well, sure, but they are definitely, unquestionably in Africa.
Well, yeah, true.
Well, it's like how even though the United States is in America and Canada is in America, they're usually considered European civs because...
Well, I think they're considered Western.
Well, yeah,
which is
but...
somewhat distinct. And you could make the case, well, not really, for the African nations.
In the game code, they are considered European because that's what the tag calls them.
Yeah,
well, it's what the basis of the civilization came from, is from a European. It's changed because of the different... Well, just because of the terrain, it sounds weird to say this, the culture changed because of the terrain, but really it is, because the things you had to do to make life in Canada and the US was a lot different from how you had to do stuff in Britain, and the culture shifted.
It seems kind of arbitrary, though, because like there are also nations or populations that originated in Africa that then moved into the Middle East or elsewhere. So, in that sense, you could say that some of those are African nations, if we're going to go this route.
Yeah.
It's a complicated subject.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, culturally, the sub-Saharan Africa is distinct from Northern Africa, and I would say both are distinct from, like, Eastern Africa.
Well, it's sort of like how everything east of Germany has a much different culture now than everything west of Germany, just because of the situation that we had in the 20th century, so...
And even before that, once you got past Eastern Europe, I mean, there's necessarily just the terrain again over so many years is going to influence how people live.
Yeah, even before World War II, a lot of Eastern European countries had more, Asian and Middle Eastern influences, as well as the huge influence of, the Russian Orthodox Church, as opposed to, the Catholic Church.
Or the Protestant movements.
Yeah.
The Etruscans, that could be interesting, but they're basically just Rome. Like, they would be good for a scenario or something like that where you're playing as early Rome and you're trying to survive against the early Italian enemies. But as a full civ, I don't know.
Kind of on that topic, maybe not, this doesn't really qualify as a full civ, but maybe as an alternate leader, is I would like to see more representation in civ of the Roman Republic. Because historically in civ, Rome and the Roman leaders have always been the imperial leaders, Caesar and all them. I don't know how well documented the Republic period is and how easy it would be to find a leader from that time period, but I think it would be nice to see that represented in the game as well.
We could easily find a Roman Republic leader. We have a lot of writings from the Roman Republic.
Yeah, I'm sure we do. They're just not as popular, and I don't know as much about it. So
I think Cicero was from the Roman Republic.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
I don't remember. He may have been right after the empire was established, but the time the Roman Empire had its civil war was about the pinnacle of Latin classical writing, And once you get past that, there's still a lot of Latin writing, but it starts to turn into more vernacular writing, except for the ecclesiastical Latin from the church. But for ancient Roman stuff, anything before 100 AD is pretty good at the ancient Roman culture before it started getting influenced by Asian stuff. If we want to look at realistically new civs, what are the highest populations in the world? Most populous nations.
Texas.
No. Total
No.
population by country. So
It's like the most populous state, maybe, but
we have China, India, and then the US. And then the next is Indonesia, which I did know, but now it makes sense why they've been added to Civ.
Yeah.
Because they are a semi-developed country with 279 million people. Pakistan is not...
I actually thought Indonesia was more populous than the United States, so that actually surprised me.
No.
It's a miracle that they've held together as a country so well, considering the differences between their islands, and like they have a huge range of cultures, a lot of population, and difficulty administrating across that, and they're still around.
And they're fairly stable, even.
Yeah.
As far as I know, they haven't had any real bad upheavals for decades, maybe.
Yeah, at minimum.
The next on the list is Pakistan at 229 million, which is a lot more than I expected. The next is Nigeria, which I knew about because it's going to be more populous than the United States by 2050.
And I think Nigeria shows up a lot on the why no insert Civ here threads in on the 2K and Civ Fanatics forums.
Yeah, that they're at a point where I'm not sure that they would count as unlikely or like a long shot to be included.
Yeah, because we've got Brazil under it that's more populous, and Russia and Japan and Ethiopia and Egypt and Vietnam.
Well, also with Nigeria, they want to make, if they do put it in, they want to make sure they do it correctly and not, piss off a bunch of people.
Nigeria is kind of a weird place because it's almost equal between Muslims and Christians, and it's also very, it has a problem with corruption, and it also has a problem with a lot of population. Like, the city of Lagos is huge, and it is very poorly, it's right on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's really low-lying, and it doesn't have good infrastructure, but it has like 10 million people. And that is a real big problem for them, and they haven't been able to get anybody in who can really do anything about it yet. But they are a democracy, and they are arguably one of the better countries in Africa that will probably be will probably grow quite a bit in the 21st century. They'll probably be on the top of the African pile. Assuming
their largest cities aren't underwater by then.
Well, they've moved their capital inland in anticipation of that.
Well, that's why I didn't say capital. I said most populous cities.
There's a set of statistics that I read a few years ago that said the largest cities in the world in 2100 will be Lagos, Nigeria, and Kinshasa, Congo. And they will both be in the neighborhood of 80 million people.
For the whole country or in one city?
In one city.
That is a lot of people.
Yeah.
How in the bleep can you do that?
That's what they're worried about, because they're not sure how they're going to do it.
Well, one thing is that
Hello?
He cut off mid-sentence there.
Think he might have gotten disconnected?
Yeah, most likely.
Well, I was going to say it would be like...
Pulled out the USB cord for my microphone.
Whoops.
What I was saying is as those countries industrialize further, one of the trends with industrializing countries is birth rates tend to fall dramatically. So
yeah, I don't know if
they factored that in.
That's why it gets so big, because right now in these African countries, the health situation is such that people are still having 15 kids because so many of them die young. And once the country begins to industrialize and kids stop dying really early, and people keep having a lot of kids for several decades because they haven't realized that many kids kind of causes a demographic problem, a lot of those people are going to move to the city because there's just no room on the farms. And that's why the United States only grows, the United States and Europe and even China are growing so slowly, is because we're mostly industrialized now, and we've kind of realized we don't need 10 kids. We only need like 2 or 3 each. But if you go back,
they actually put that in legislature. So
yeah, but if you go back to like the 1900s, you still had people having 5 to 6 kids, 10 to 10 kids sometimes, because they hadn't realized that they weren't likely to lose as many of them in childhood. Like in the 1800s, you would lose probably, if you were unlucky, you could lose half your children to pneumonia before they were 5 years old. So,
yeah, I've heard that in many parts of the world, it is not uncommon to not even name a baby until like their first birthday, because so many of them don't make it that long.
Yeah, I have heard that as well, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any ideas for things we could add to Civ that are unexpected?
Florida.
Yeah, let's not end the show on the topic of dying babies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Florida. That's the next Civ. Let's go. The leader will be... We're going full meme. The leader is Florida Man.
The next one on the list that isn't already in the game is Mexico.
Ooh.
And then the next one is Philippines, and then Thailand, and then Tanzania, South Africa. Italy is in the game technically.
Well, I was going to say somebody might argue that Mexico's technically in the game because we have the Aztecs, but that's totally separate from the European influence, Mexico, because they had their own.
Again, that's like putting in like the Chinook and saying that the U.S. is represented because the Chinook are in the game. Like, okay, if you want to go that route, there are a lot of nations that have no business being in the game.
No. There's 1800s Mexico is a very interesting period in its history, and if you had somebody from that period representing, not modern per se, but closer to current day Mexico, that would be interesting. I would actually like to see that.
We don't need France. We already have the Roman Empire.
And that's also one of the really neat things that humankind does, is that each of the civilizations is actually tied to a specific era. So not only do you get to represent more civilizations, but you also get to represent them in the period of history that is most relevant. You don't have the United States, founding Washington, D.C. in 4000 BC in humankind.
That comes with its own problems, though.
It does. It can definitely be jarring to be playing as, Rome and then suddenly be, like China or something, or go from being, classical Greece to being the Aztecs.
Yeah.
Translation. There's still a lot of civilizations that we haven't covered because people are probably looking at the wrong era of said civilization, thinking, "Oh, they're just this." But no. Go a little further. Go back. Go a little further forward. Go back a little bit, and you might find an interesting area you could represent with the leader and have something different and new in Civ.
Yeah, more African civs, more Native American civs. I think we can call it there.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this has been PolyCast 401. I am your host, CanusAlbinus, and we did finally get a Mackie.
Woo!
TheMeInTeam.
I'll show you over randomization.
And MegaBearsFan.
And I will leave by having the baby once again unplug the microphone.
Oh no.
No, now he's just playing with the computer case.
Ooh, shiny.
Yeah, it has lights on it.
So does mine, although they aren't really something you can play with.
Well, there's like a door on the front of the computer case with lights on it. He is currently mesmerized by it. And there he goes, to the wires.
Civilization 3, 4, 5, Beyond Earth, and 6 sound clips. Copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright the PolyCast at thepolycast.net.